Thank you. At the outset, I would like to thank the Scientific Committee of All India Ophthalmic Society and Chairman Scientific Committee, Dr. Partha Biswas, for giving us this opportunity to present this very important topic, medico-legal aspects for the ophthalmologist, what they never taught us in the medical colleges. So I will just introduce about the course. I will start my presentation regarding the introduction. So medico-legal aspects for ophthalmologists, what they never taught us in medical colleges. I will be chief instructor for this course, Dr. Viral Shah from Nagpur. So as we all know, these are very turbulent times for the ophthalmic practice, and day in and day out, we see such newspaper headlines or media headlines or on social media or TV everywhere that eye care center and ophthalmologists are being sued right, left and center. So claiming ignorance of law is not an excuse for us as an ophthalmologist. We must be abreast about all the recent updates regarding laws and changes, and we should know our legal liabilities and legal duties as an ophthalmologist. We as an ophthalmologist and doctors in general are made to face trial by the courts, also by consumer court, criminal court, and by media also. There is trial by media also nowadays, and government setup, administration setup. They are all targeting us doctors for our alleged malpractices, and the current climate in our country is such that more and more cases are being filed up. So what we need to do is understand what our medical legal liabilities are and how we can avoid the various pitfalls. So basically our course will be about the new updated Consumer Protection Act 2019, practical and important highlights for ophthalmologists by Dr. Prakash Marathe sir from Pune, informed consents and counseling, basic foundation for building patient's trust by myself, Dr. Viral Shah, meticulous medical records, first, last, and a most important line of defense by Dr. Rajesh Joshi sir. Legal notice received. When you receive a legal notice, don't panic, be prepared by the stalwart Dr. A. Deshpande sir. Landmark medical legal judgments by courts, what we can learn from them by Dr. Aarti Heda from Pune, and professional indemnity insurance covers for ophthalmologists by Dr. Ketki Bhatt from Dhule. Also, we are very privileged to have with us keynote address by Dr. Pradeep Ramuli, Professor Dr. Pradeep Ramulu from Director Wilmer Eye Institute, USA, and he will be giving his keynote on role of physical activity against the eye disease. So without wasting much time, I think we should start with our first talk, and I would invite our first speaker, our most respected and stalwart from Pune, Dr. Prakash Marathe sir, past president of Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society, past president of IMA Pune, and also managing committee member of All India Ophthalmic Society. Dr. Prakash Marathe sir, welcome, and you can start your presentation, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Viral, for the wonderful introduction. I am thankful to All India Ophthalmological Society, Scientific Committee, Chairman Dr. Partha, and all Governing Council of All India Ophthalmological Society for giving me this opportunity to present in this particular IC. And I must thank Dr. Viral, who is my close friend. Since so many years, we have been together for various ICs. And I think this is the IC he has given me the opportunity. I am thankful for that. Is my screen visible? Viral?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Perfect. Sir.
Yes, sir. Visible.
I think I am the opening batsman of the session. I was in another session. The session ended and then I entered here. So I was that way not late because that session stopped and I came here only. I think in this medical legal session, what Dr. Viral has given me, that is the topic of Consumer Protection Act. Most of us have heard about this particular act. And basically in the year 2019, there were some changes done in this particular act. Practical and important highlights for an ophthalmologist is the topic given to me by Dr. Viral. This slide is very important. Miss all my talk, you are going to listen afterwards. But these are the important changes which were done in Consumer Protection Act 2019. First thing is, when this particular act came, there were congratulatory messages on social media that medical fatality is being out of Consumer Protection Act. But then When all of us were very happy, very much pleased, there was another view. No, it is under the purview of Consumer Protection Act. Because in that particular law, medical fraternity word was not written. So people thought it is out of that. But then there is some exclusion criteria list. In that exclusion criteria list, medical profession is not written. So unless it is not written there, we are not out of this particular thing. So beware, we are under Consumer Protection Act. Another thing is compensation has been increased so many folds. This is the worst thing. But good thing is you must remember the compensation which will be asked, which again will be related to the bills what you have put to that patient. So it should be relative to the bills what you have charged to your patient. Third worst thing is jurisdiction anywhere in India. Previously, where you were practicing, that was jurisdiction. Now, suppose the patient is staying in Assam and he quotes your case in that particular court, you will have to go there. There is alternative to that. You can request the court to take part that particular place to your place, but then it is the lengthy procedure. And next thing is the provision of consumer mediation cells. Some mediators are allowed officially. This is good as well as bad. Good in the sense, in between the case, you can compromise and settle on that. Worst thing is there are mediating agencies. They are making money out of it, and they are troubling a lot to medical professionals. So basically, when Consumer Protection Act came, it was doctor-patient relationship which was kept in mind. Doctor, basically, it is not the business. We are not the sailors. We are professionals. But there is a confusion made from government point of view. And patient, it is a client, buyer or consumer. What this act feels, basically, it is a patient from our point of view. They are thinking it is pro-patient, government thought, but no, it is anti-doctor, and that is the worst thing. But patients are also receiving bad taste of it. Nobody knows about it. Yes, everybody knows, but still it is the worst thing because medical fraternity is getting hampered due to this particular law. For medical legal protection, what people have been doing in medical professions, investigation, CT, MRI, second opinion, defensive practice, faith, there is suspicion. So both are affected, doctors, medical fraternity, as well as patients and general public. So doctor is answerable surely to these many things like medical council, civil courts, criminal court, Janta Darbar, and consumer redressal forum. And unfortunately, all simultaneously or sequentially. So bad taste can be there from all points of view. Doctorable CPA is a special law of civil nature with the aim of a social welfare to protect consumers with following features. I think no court fee was there. Now they have thought about rupees 5,000. Again, it is not bigger for the patients. Simple procedure to filing, hearing, deciding, that was the aim of the government. Summary trial, speedy redressal, that was the aim. Non-judicial members on forum, and out of them one is female. Not a court, but has a full force of it, that is quasi-judicial. Majority opinion is the order of the forum. Act is compulsory and not preventive or punitive. Appeals to all paid goes and services, but only free services covered are medical. This is unfortunate thing. Even if we are treating free patients and few of them are charged, the person comes under the Consumer Protection Act. Jurisdiction. This is very, very important slide in relation to 2019 CPA. District forum, it was less than 20 lakhs. Now it is 1 crore. State commission, it was around 20 to 100 lakhs. That is 1 crore. Now it has gone to 10 crores. Appeals plus administrative powers are there. For national commission, it was more than 100 crores. That was 1 crore. Now, unfortunately, it's more than 10 crores. And division appeals are possible. So this is the worst thing. If you see these figures, 1 crore, 10 crore, more than 10 crores, are the doctors in position to earn this much in their life? Why so much compensation? Procedure. I think summary procedure, complaint in 4 to 6 copies, affidavit, then referred to opposite parties, reply in 30 days is expected, extension up to 15 days, then hearing by president plus at least 1 member. Then lawyer is not mandatory. Evidence on affidavits, expert book references, if elaborate, may be asked to go to civil court. An order to be signed by president plus one member. Ex parte decision is also possible. Suppose you feel that you are not concerned with that case and you are not attending that particular court, probably they can give the decision against you. So appeal system, this is the sequence: district forum, state commission, national commission, and Supreme Court. So proposed changes: power of interim orders, power of injunctions, increasing pecuniary jurisdictions, national commission only appellate jurisdiction, and more benches of state and national commissions. I think I'll be speaking a little bit about it. Most of the times when the patients, they are unhappy, they try to trouble the doctors and hospitals, and they try to blame the doctors. And this particular Consumer Protection Act is the very easy tool in the hands of patients and the relatives. They try to trouble you, they try to blackmail you, and they try to gain more and more money from the doctors and hospitals. So what you have to do is you have to be very careful. Your documentation has to be perfect. Your consent taking has to be perfect. Your chair time has to be more. And you must be in a position to convince the patient and the relatives in a proper way. If you are doing that, probably you will be safe and you will not be coming under these particular litigations in future. I think Consumer Protection Act, which was redesigned in 2019, it is the worst thing. You have to move around at various places, not from your own clinic or hospital place. And then compensation, which has been increased from lakhs to crores. And again, the mediator thing. These are many more things which are being added. And we must be careful in doing our practice. I hope all of you should be out of this particular. I pray Almighty to remain out of this particular thing, all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the patient listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for the excellent summary of Consumer Protection Act 2019. And next in line for our instruction course is myself. I would be speaking on informed consents and counseling. As we all know, Marathe sir has already Good afternoon, everyone. So as Dr. Marathe sir has already told us about the Consumer Protection Act of 2019 and various challenges we doctors face due to that. And the basic problem is if we don't want to go there in a consumer court, that is informed consent and counseling. So the brief outline about my course, about my talk: informed consent, the law as it stands today, essential guidelines, understanding the problem, why patients decide to sue or file complaints, relevance of a consent form, how we can convey caring attitudes with information, what is the process of getting the informed consent, how we can integrate the process and the consent form, and what are various model consent forms. As a starting point, it is necessary for us to understand some of the basic legal fundamentals of the consent law. Informed consent, as it is defined, is a process for getting permission towards a medical treatment by a patient, granted in full knowledge of the possible consequences, risks, and benefits. Now, there are two viewpoints. One is the Indian viewpoint or our viewpoint, and one is the Western world or the American viewpoint. The patient viewpoint or the Western world viewpoint means that the type of information that should be disclosed to a patient should be based on what a reasonable person in patient's position would want to know in similar circumstances. Whereas in India, there is a reasonable physician standard which defines disclosure based on what a reasonable practitioner in the medical community would customarily disclose under the same or like circumstances. The law clearly states that it is a non-deligible duty. You cannot allot it to anyone. आप नहीं बोल सकते. You cannot say कि I had asked my counselor to do it or my assistant to do it or my technician to do it. It is ultimately your duty. It is a non-deligible duty. And you have to disclose and discuss with the patient your diagnosis, the nature and purpose of the treatment, the risk and benefit, alternative methods, along with its risks and benefits, and the risks and benefits of no treatment. All this you have to cover in your consents. Almost there is some good news. So many cases are being filed right and left, but 95% of them are being settled in favor of the doctors or ophthalmologists. Then the question remains, why were such cases filed in the first place when there were no sufficient legal grounds for complaint to succeed? The basic and simple answer for that is because the patients were surprised by the clinical outcome, or they were angry with the provider or the ophthalmologist, who they strongly believe to have caused it. General assumptions that it is motivated by personal greed or by predatory lawyers are not proved, and they are usually not the fact. Patients decide to sue because they strongly believe that ophthalmologists did not warn them about the potential medical problems following treatment or procedure, or that the doctors tried to mislead them. These are the basic two things where the patient feel aggrieved. Usually the decision to sue or not comes down to whether the patient believed the physician cared about them personally or not. So you have to give some caring attitude to the patient. A survey of patients who experienced adverse clinical outcome proved that patients who chose to file a case in court regarded their ophthalmologist or physician to be uncaring as compared to the patient who elected not to file a case. So in such a scenario, what is the relevance of a consent form? Consent form is a best constructed legal consent form. Even a best constructed legal form becomes virtually powerless to forestall litigation. Anybody can go to court anywhere according to the new law. But a consent form coupled with the patient's perception that important clinical information was personally conveyed by a caring physician could help to prevent many catastrophes. A physician who expressly acknowledges certain clinical uncertainty and empathizes with the patient forms a bond which the patient will pursue as caring and personal attitude. Consent activities take place as a process that begins when the first patient encounters the doctors or the team of or your team. Forms and signatures are merely an end stage outcome or culmination of the process. Informed consent is still regarded in many ophthalmic practices as discrete legal event. It is important to change the mindset of the entire patient care team. Hospital support staff such as nurses, paramedical personnel and administrative must first be encouraged to shift their focus from paperwork to the process of getting that consent. Documentation is important but should not be the sole purpose. When possible, start it as early as possible in the continuum of the care. Try to make arrangements to have family members present when discussing about various pros and cons of the therapy. During the initial or subsequent visit, introduce the consent form, clarify it is for intended to help both the patient as well as ophthalmologist. Important facts which matter to the patient have been discussed and understood, and be frank and honest about the clinical uncertainties. Give the patient a copy of the form or documentation. Don't hide it from them. Don't deny them that copy. It doesn't make any difference whether you give them the copy or not. If a patient appears troubled over the risk or concern, empathize with them, accept their ultimate decision, and if the consent process was poorly handled as described, there should be no animosity. When possible, make contemporaneous note. Nowadays, people go for video recordings also. Make contemporaneous note in the patient's record during all phases of the consent process, even if a form is used. Ironically, very few medical practices case lost by physicians are solely related to legal doctrine of informed consent. Yet, it is this legal components and language of consent forms that dominate risk management seminars and instruction courses. Clearly, more malpractices cases with consent issues are lost for reasons related to defective process and communications rather than the forms or legal requirement. So what is a model consent form? The best way to document such information, and more importantly to record that consent process took place is still through the pre-established forms. It is essential for all members of practice management team to regard such document not as just another form to complete, but as important informational tool to establish a strong alliance between ophthalmologist and patient. A short form entry should be avoided. Risk, benefit, and alternatives have been explained to the patient should be clearly mentioned. Handwritten entries should be avoided as far as possible. The use of consent form or most operative procedure is still the best way for ophthalmologists to document the whole process. There is no one right or wrong answer in designing a ophthalmic consent form. Like all parts of medical records, consent form must be dynamic and it should represent the ophthalmologist made a reasonable effort to effectively carry out his important duty as a part of patient's ongoing care. A number of ophthalmic specific forms are available at various websites, including our own AIOS.org. And now it is available in Marathi also for the state of Maharashtra, thanks to our team of dynamic team of members of that consent form. Or if you need some more assistance in that, you can always email or WhatsApp us. We will send you various consent forms. These are the references, and that's all I would like to share at this moment. So I think we have got sufficient. I finished within time. So
thank you, Dr. Viral. It was a wonderful presentation. Because you're the chief instructor, I must talk about it. Only 2 lines I'll add here, because All India Ophthalmological Society has come out with the booklet of informed consent forms in English, and the same we have translated in the state of Maharashtra. Those are Marathi consents. We have taken the lead, and these consents are available on website of MOS. So just it is for the benefit of members that they can just take help of those informed consents.
A link has been created at the MOS website also. So all the members practicing in the state of Maharashtra can utilize that Marathi forms also. And one more important thing is that all these consent forms should be taken on a letterhead, sir, of the hospital, or a rubber stamp.
Yeah, it should be on the letterhead of the hospital. And every consent form is different for every surgery and every disease.
Yes.
And they are practically made medico-legally proof by me, and everything is covered. So better to print out that forms and fill the remaining information in that form. And the judgment given by the National Commission was saying that specific form should be there. They never said that they should not be printed.
Yes, sir.
I think in connection to this one line, we have prepared so many consents for all topics, and each and every procedure there is a separate consent. And what sir has said, that you can download that. So consent forms, those are downloadable format. So you can download that, print on your letterhead, and utilize accordingly. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. So moving on with our next speaker, it is Professor Dr. Rajesh Joshi, sir, from Professor and Head, Department of Ophthalmology, Government Medical College, Nagpur, and also Joint Secretary of Maharashtra Ophthalmological Society. He will be speaking on meticulous medical record, your first, last, and most important line of defense in the courts. Welcome, Dr. Rajesh Joshi, sir. You can start your presentation, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Viral, for including me in this IC. In fact, Viral has been conducting this since last so many years at national as well as state level with jam-packed stadium, jam-packed hall. My special thanks to Chairman Scientific Committee, Dr. Partha, and Governing Council for giving me this opportunity. My topic for presentation is meticulous medical records, your first, last, and most important line of defense in the court. Out of what is the importance of record keeping in ophthalmology? Now, out of the points which I have enumerated, most important thing is helpful in any medical litigation, because the legal system relies mainly on documentary evidence in situation of alleged medical negligence, because poor records means poor defense and no records means no defense. There are various methods for record keeping. This is the manual method, and any hospital room which is used for record keeping will look like this. No space for sitting, and it's difficult to find out any record if you want during any emergency. The best part is keeping records in an electronic system. This is the most preferred method because it is neat and tidy. Prescription is fully typed, so no errors in understanding and handwriting. Previous data of patient is easily available, and photographs, if you have clicked any photograph, OCT records or perimetry records are there, you can very well keep in the electronic system. Medical records, whatever you are keeping, are in the form of history, clinical examination, diagnostic tests, preoperative care records, operation notes, and postoperative care records. Now we will see one by one how documenting history is important, and it can save us if patient goes to the consumer forum. Now this is the case scenario. Patient underwent cataract surgery uneventfully and had no improvement in vision. Patient approached consumer court and result was in favor of doctor because in history notes, it was clearly mentioned decreased vision in that eye since childhood, that eye was amblyopic. That's why in spite of surgery, patient is not going to get any vision, but this has to be documented properly in the history part. Second is how clinical findings help in savior if something goes wrong. Cataract surgery, which was uneventful, recurrent post-op inflammation and iritis with all the possible treatment. I ultimately went into phthisis. Patient approached consumer forum. Result was still in favor of surgeon because pre-op documentation clearly mentioned complicated cataract with all signs of field uveitis, and cataract was operated under steroid cover, under guarded prognosis. So documentation of all clinical findings is very important. Now, how investigations can save your day. Cataract surgery in diabetic patient. Patient did not improve after surgery. Patient approached consumer forum for non-improvement of vision. Result was in favor of surgeon because pre-op OCT findings came to his rescue, showing that significant preoperative macular edema, and patient had received anti-VEGF treatment with cataract surgery. So documentation of the investigations which were done is very important and it may save your day. How preoperative care is important in documentation. Cataract surgery was performed uneventfully. Post-op follow-up was fine. Patient had endophthalmitis in early post-op period. Surgeon gave intravitreal injections. Patient was referred to vitreoretinal surgeon and vitreoretinal surgeon performed vitrectomy. Case was filed in consumer forum for compensation for non-improvement of vision and all mental and physical trauma. Surgeon still escaped clean because pre-op records mentioned that fumigation and autoclaving of instrument was properly done and it was documented on records. Betadine eye drops were instilled and was mentioned in case paper. Preoperative antibiotic drops were instilled and mentioned in case paper, and patient was referred to vitreoretinal surgeon with date and time which was mentioned on the case paper when the referral was done to the vitreoretinal surgeon. Now, operative notes are very important. If you are performing even a small surgery like chalazion or sty, you should mention it properly because that comes as a savior later on. This patient was operated for posterior polar cataract and patient had reigned intraoperatively. Vitrectomy was done by surgeon and IOL was implanted in sulcus. Pre-op notes mentioned that cataract surgery was advised and anterior vitrectomy may be needed during surgery. As we know, PC rent is common in posterior polar cataract and it happened. Good part was everything was documented. Detailed OT notes made consumer forum result in surgeon's favor. Now, OPD prescription, we write OPD prescription. Sometimes we are not able to, in fact, interpret it if you see after 1 or 2 days. This is very important document. You should mention name of the patient, date when you examine the patient, treatment preferably in capital letters, duration of the eye drops which were prescribed should be mentioned, signature of the doctor must be there, and review date. If you are suppose reviewing the patient after 7 days, you should mention the date on which you are going to review the patient. OPD prescription date is important because undated prescription can lead a doctor in a trouble if the patient misuses that prescription. OPD prescription, how it is important. For giant papillary conjunctivitis, steroid drops were prescribed for limited period. Patient used steroid drops for long time. Patient developed steroid-induced cataract later on. Patient sues doctor for development of cataract due to steroid drops. Doctors still go away clean because his prescription clearly mentioned steroid drops to be instilled for a particular period and tapered off gradually. Tip mentioned on OPD paper, long-term use of steroid drops can cause cataract and glaucoma. Another important thing is discharge summary. You should mention date of admission, date of discharge, date of surgery, surgical procedure, and of course, time is very important. And the treatment advice post-operatively, precautions to be taken, and date of next follow-up. Discharge summary should be signed by consultant. Copy should be kept with surgeon. Discrepancies in discharge summary and hospital records can raise suspicion about tampering of medical records, and it should be avoided. Referral letter is another important document. It should include date, time of issue, patient's condition, cause of referral, and duplicate copy with patient signature. Medical certificate. We give medical certificates to so many patients, but we must mention the date on which the medical certificate has been given, for which it has been given, and one identification mark and patient signature. A lot of cases of patients misusing medical certificate has been seen due to lack of date, time, and issue, because sometimes we issue the certificate and patient makes some changes in those certificates. Now, MCI guidelines for medical record keeping, and this is not very clear. In fact, I consulted Marathi sir as well regarding this, because there is no consensus about this. For consumer forum, patient can approach outdoor case within 2 hours, within 2 years, and indoor case within 3 years. Maintain outdoor records for 3 to 5 years and maintain indoor records for 3 years. In fact, we should keep indoor records for lifelong, because we never know when you will need those records. If patient demands his case,
Just a minute. Instead of 3 years, just remember 6 to 7 years. One of my senior medical legal consultant told me. Yeah, thank you. You can continue.
Okay, fine, sir. Fine, sir. Thank you. Thank you for correcting. If patient demands case paper for any purpose, you should give case paper within 72 hours. And the receipt of OPD should be kept for tax purpose for around 8 years. And criminal case records till it is settled. For pediatric cases, a medical negligence case can be filed by child after acquiring the age of majority. So in medical cases, documents should be preserved until the case is solved. So in summary, medical record is an important aspect in one's medical practice. It not only helps to improve our patient management, develops a treatment plan, improve our personality by presenting and publishing the studies, but also helpful in if legal problem arises and suit in consumer forum. That's all from my side. Thank you so much for your patience listening.
Thank you, Rajesh Joshi sir. That was an excellent recap on what we should do for maintaining our medical records and how it can help us in courts, along with some case studies also. I would request participants who are not panelists who are not speaking to keep their mics mute, so that background disturbances are not known. Now the next in line is our own Bhishma Pitama of medical legal sciences in India, all over India, Dr. Anant Deshpande sir, past president of Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society and also legal head of medical legal committee and head of medical legal committee of AIOS. So we welcome you, Dr. Anant Deshpande sir, and
Thank you.
And you will be speaking on what to do when you receive a legal notice. Don't panic, be prepared. Sir, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, welcome to all. So the medical legal notice can be received from the patient itself, advocate, civil court, consumer court, MCI or state medical council, police station, criminal court called as warrant, or other agencies at health services and all that. But the answer to the notice is not to be required to be given if the notice is from the patient or the advocate, because that can be said that if you want to give answer, you can give the answer, but with consultation with your advocate, particularly the medical legal consultant. But if you don't give that answer, it doesn't matter much. For that contact medico-legal consultant or company. Whenever one receives a notice from advocate or court, consult medico-legal consultant or medico-legal company and submit written statement with his help in the CPA court. But whenever you receive the notice from a CPA court, you have to give the return, that is a written statement to the court, and the written statement should be given very nicely, well documented and everything. So you should take the help of the advocate or a medico-legal consultant. In criminal case, give statement to the police or present in criminal court through advocate or consultant with medico-legal consultant. So this is also required. Whenever there is a notice from the criminal court, you have to be there. Do not refuse the notice, as even if you refuse, it is been taken that granted that you were informed. It doesn't matter whether you take the notice or don't take the notice. It is only the information by the court or the authority that you were informed. Whether you take or don't take, it is immaterial. So don't refuse the notice. If you refuse the notice, you don't know what is to be answered in future. Answer the notice with the help of advocate and medico-legal consultant. It is not mandatory to answer the notice of patient and advocate, which I already said. Have a indemnity insurance with good coverage limit and a medico-legal consultant as advisor. So this is very important. Now this district court forums has come to the authority of ordering more than 1 crore rupees damages. I will say here a little bit that it doesn't depend upon the bill submitted. Bill submission is only for the limit of the district forum or the state forum. If the bills are within the 1 crore, they can be submitted in the district commission. So this, and how much bills you have submitted, it doesn't matter how much damages are claimed. Have a indemnity insurance with a good coverage limit, and now so one should have a good medico-legal coverage, that is at least 1 crore. And for that, MOS has made a challenge to that, and we have brought the premium of 1 crore from 30 lakhs to 7,200, and any MOS member or ophthalmologist can have this policy, and this is 1 crore coverage to him. Do not become panic if you receive the notice. So indemnity insurance policy should be taken for doctors and hospitals with staff separately. This is very important, because if you have taken the indemnity insurance for the hospital and notice is given to your name, so that will not be taken into consideration by the court. Or if the case is on both you and your hospital, and they are totally different of ownership, then both will be in soup, because you will not be covered with the hospital indemnity. So have a separate indemnity insurance for hospital and yourself. Doctor or hospital is sued in CPA court not for complication but for negligence. This is the very, very important part, because complications are going to happen. Those complications which happen and noted in the textbooks or the journals are never taken as a negligence. The base of the case in the consumer is negligence. That is not knowing the complication happened, not taking proper step to rectify it, not referring to, not taking or help of the proper specialist, or leaving the patient on unqualified under the subordinate. That is the negligence. So patient should say that I am being neglected, and that is the only cause for which he is demanding the damages. The doctor will not be held responsible under negligence if the treatment is as per the standard textbooks and or accepted professional practices, and still patient suffers loss or injury. So whatever you are giving the treatment is generally from the textbooks or journals only. So you will not be challenged for why you have given this treatment, why you have not given that treatment. Merely because a complication has occurred, doctor is never charged for that. The Supreme Court, in case of Suresh Gupta, has given the decision that for every mishap or health death during medical treatment, the medical man cannot be proceeded against for the negligence. So this is the protection given by the Supreme Court, because he knows very well that the results are not in the hands of the doctor. Whatever way they treat the patient, whatever consents they take, all the consents, we take all the consent of everything proof, but they are not useful in consumer court, because the basis of the consumer court is different. You are taking the consents for the complications that may happen, and you are sued for the negligence. You cannot say that, yeah, I am going to do the negligence with the patient, and so that type of consent you cannot take, and so you are not totally immune by taking the consent in the consumer courts, but it must be taken, and it should be very, very informed consent. Particularly in criminal cases, it is very useful. The medical man is not an insurer. He does not warrant the successfulness of the treatment or cure of the patient. So this is very important. You cannot say that I will cure this patient, I will do the surgery 100% successful, I will give you 6/6 vision. Never give that assurance, because you are not an insurer. And for that, I will say these doctors are not to worry, because the thing is that the patients are going to sue you for any reason. It may be actually negligence which has happened or not happened, but they can blame you that you have done the negligence. But nowadays, because the district commissions are given the powers of asking the patients of giving the damages of 1 crore rupees, there are so many frivolous complaints registered under the CPA court against the doctor to earn the money. So you cannot prevent this. You have to think in your mind that in your medical career, you may meet such cases in future, not because of your fault, but because of the circumstances, the law, and the things which are going on now. The advocates are, I will not say that it should not be, but the facts are there. As in US, the advocates are always behind the ambulances. So here also the same thing is happening, because as new 19 law, there is a provision for mediation. And this mediation is, as Mr. Prakash said, it is a good and bad. Really, it is good and bad, in the sense that whenever there is a mediator, the mediator is appointed by the government to that particular court, and he is authorized a person, and he is not simple mediator of the advocates. So whenever the case is given in the court hears the case and passes over to the mediator. Nowadays, advocates are putting a case of 1 crore. So the mediator says that, okay, we will compromise. Advocate also say, okay, doctor will come. I will see that doctor will compromise. And from 1 crore, if they come to 5 crores, lakhs, 10 lakhs, it is, doctor is very happy that let the money go, but there will be peace, and the mediation will be given, and the court will order. This is a very bad state of condition. So don't worry, have a medical legal consultant, have an advocate with you, and have a good insurance, and not to worry for any type of notice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That as usual, that was an excellent talk of about what we should do, and we should never panic, because getting notices now is a part of our daily life, I think, practice, and each and every doctor will be getting 1 or 2 notices in his lifetime at least, if not more.
Yeah.
So the next in line is we have got some important landmark judgments regarding ophthalmologists and what we should learn them. And to present that, we have got a young dynamic ophthalmologist from Pune, KKI Institute, Pune, Dr. Aarti Heda, along with many of her degrees, DNB, FICO, MRCS, and FICO, all that. She is also a PG diploma in medical legal services. She has worked as a consultant in Africa for 4 years. She runs a hugely popular webinar series for Young Ophthalmologist Society of India, and she's also national coordinator for ISCMS. So welcome, Dr. Aarti, and you can begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. At the outset, I would like to thank AIOC and Dr. Viral Shah, sir, my first teacher in ophthalmology, for this opportunity. So my topic is landmark medico-legal judgments by court, what we learned from them as ophthalmologists. So why are we so burdened? The cost of technology is high in ophthalmology, but given the increasingly competitive environment and social demand, there is a pressure to progressively lower the cost to the consumers. To keep costs down, there is a tendency to do as many surgeries as possible in an assembly line fashion, both in hospital as well as in the charitable camps. So we get in trouble when we try to cut the corners. Be cautious, even if on free side, the penalties are too high, as already mentioned. So why do I say so? There was a very good perspective published in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology in 2019, when the ophthalmologist turned blind by Dr. Nagpal and group. The first line of the article was very important. There is none so blind as one who will not see. So let's look at a couple of judgments and published data and learn few lessons. So, the Kerala High Court in 2018 reduced the compensation awarded by the session courts against a hospital in Tamil Nadu from 92 million rupees to 22.5 million rupees for victims of negligence in an eye camp, which was partially funded by DBCS. Criminal charges against the doctors and administrator of the hospital were thankfully dropped. The reasons given by the Honorable Court to award compensation was that there was no approval to run the hospital, consent to operate was not taken from State Pollution Control Board, there was no proper design and maintenance of the operating room, there was no anesthetist, no pharmacist, and no facility to do preoperative laboratory tests, and there was no formalin which was indented despite it being out of the stock by the hospital head. The court also frowned up the fact that knowingly fully well that the intraocular lens cost only 56 rupees for the purpose of attracting the villagers has distributed pamphlets stating that they will be implanted with intraocular lens worth 1,000 to 3,000 rupees. Despite Pseudomonas having been cultured from ringer lactate being used, the manufacturing company was absolved by any wrongdoing because a sample of different batch number examined from the company stocks was found to be as required standard. So this is, however, not the first and only case where doctors have been operated or organized eye camps have been penalized. So there was another landmark judgment in 1989, which was also on similar case where 84 persons in Khurja and 15 in Moradabad lost their vision due to endophthalmitis, which led to guidelines being laid for the eye camps. So Honorable Supreme Court awarded more than 26.5 million compensation, including the 6% interest in one case for failing to diagnose retinopathy of prematurity. Though the case and the award was not against the ophthalmologist, but against the pediatrician who treated the premature baby and the hospital, plus the state of Tamil Nadu, but the implications of this judgment for ophthalmologists in terms of quantum of compensation being awarded for loss of vision is enormous. So in another recent case where a patient of dengue developed intraocular hemorrhage and was seen by ophthalmologist after 13 hours, the complainant who finally lost his vision was awarded 3.5 million compensation despite correct treatment having been given by the doctors. Recently, a patient following LASIK surgery for high myopia underwent toric implantable Collamer lens. For unsatisfactory results, claimed a sum of 60 million plus for compensation. Thankfully, the court did not agree to such exorbitant claims, especially when the boy completed higher education after surgery and was gainfully employed and active on social media as found by an investigator hired by the hospital. So where we are, the Consumer Protection Act 1986 in its definition has excluded free services from purview of Consumer Protection Act, but the Honorable Supreme Court in its wisdom decided that doctors providing free services also would be covered with the purview of CPA. This decision has never been reviewed thereafter, and the implication of free medical and eye camps are being realized belatedly and very slowly. It has been repeatedly seen that cause of infection and ophthalmitis in cases of multiple surgeries at eye camps is linked to use of RL and eye drops, which are sometimes of dubious quality. No company manufacturing the drug used in these eye camps have been to date prosecuted despite being implicated many a times. For ophthalmologists, there was also the issue regarding the off-label use of injection Avastin. Hospital in Gujarat and another hospital in Varanasi reported loss of vision following Avastin injection. So this is not the only case in India. There have been various incidences, similar incidences in past. The company manufacturing the drug played safe by stating that it promotes Avastin only for carcinoma colon and does not support use of drug through routes of administration for which it was not developed or registered. Given the relative safety and low risk involved in cataract surgery, as well as the desire to cut the cost, competing in a throat cut environment, most of the ophthalmologists in India do not insist on preoperative test except maybe blood sugar. This has been frowned upon frequently by courts, and recently in a state consumer dispute redressal commission of Maharashtra case, the article medical tests before eye surgery when you need them and when you don't, published by American Academy of Ophthalmology in the year 2019, was referred to and quoted. Compensation was awarded in this case for not doing preoperative test as well as not taking proper consent. Ophthalmologists, like other doctors of other specialties, use abbreviations and short forms instead of detailed notes. So this was highlighted in a recent case where the ophthalmologist on 24th day of birth had examined the premature child and written in notes, no ROP seen. The child was thereafter discharged and advised to come for follow-up in a special clinic where such children are being closely monitored. The court observed that OP5 should have performed the retinal examination with binocular indirect ophthalmoscope on dilatation of pupil with scleral depression to ascertain a vascular zone at the periphery of retina. Nothing is forthcoming from the medical record that this was done. Therefore, it appears to be only a bare visual examination done by OP5 in haste to cover up. The court's view was that neither had the doctors done examination for ROP nor had they advised follow-up for ROP for the child. 6.4 million compensation was awarded in this case. A 9-year child underwent ophthalmic surgery for squint. The patient suffered cardiac asystole towards the end of the surgery. Successful resuscitation was done, but the patient continued to have episodes of asystole and bradycardia, for which the pacemaker wire was placed. The patient subsequently passed away in ICU. NCDRC concluded that a consent obtained from the mother of the child was just a routine consent and not really an informed consent. Although the anesthetist claimed that retrobulbar block was given by the surgeon, the 3 document, that is the anesthesia note, the ophthalmic surgery note, or the physician's progress note, had no mention of retrobulbar block. Hence, the NCDRC concluded that no retrobulbar block was given. The word glyco was written instead of glycopyrrolate in the OT record, and use of confusing abbreviations in medical record is deficiency in service. Compensation was awarded on these grounds. So where even improper OPD prescriptions, especially if post-operative instructions are not properly written, can result in damage being awarded by courts. After a pterygium surgery, the doctor advised the patient to use mitomycin C, but committed error by not prescribing the medicine was to be used for how many days. Appellant, instead of coming back for checkup, continued using MMC without consulting the doctor, which led to damage caused to his eye. Compensation was awarded as limited negligence of the doctor for not writing a complete and proper prescription. Contributory negligence by the patient was held by the court in this case because he continued to take medicine on his own without consulting a doctor. In another case, a post-cataract surgery patient who was a coolie did not take rest. Patient developed corneal injury due to working in his fields. The court held that he should have been instructed about post-operative care and follow-up. Both the medical record was devoid of such instructions. Compensation was awarded by lower courts, upheld by NCDRC. So this is my last slide. So lessons learned: time have changed now, then there is cost to be paid even for providing free services. In India, the prevalent tradition of providing free services has also resulted in a lowering of guard by the eye surgeons. These mass eye camps, popularly called as, let's say, mass eye surgeries, have been done for millions of people's benefit. But recently, there is an increase in number of cases where exorbitant penalty has been imposed by courts, and this has destroyed careers of many ophthalmologists. Time has now come to introspect and to factor the cost of litigations and compensation into the cost of surgeries so that we not only benefit the patient, but also safeguard the ophthalmologist and help them fulfill their responsibilities toward their own dependents. So problems are bound to happen. How we face them and how we overcome them will make us a better surgeon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aarti, for such a wonderful presentation regarding the various landmark legal judgments against the ophthalmologist, which should pave the path for us to consider what our next move should be. Now, as we all know that litigation is inevitable in the life of an ophthalmologist. So the most important thing that we must have is professional indemnity insurance cover. And to speak on that, we have got a young dynamic ophthalmologist from Dhule, Dr. Ketki Shah Bhatt. She has done her, after doing her MS from Nagpur, she has pursued her cornea and microsurgery fellowship from Arvinda Eye Hospital. And she has got numerous presentations in national and international conferences. And she has been also published 3 articles in indexed national and international journals. Welcome, Dr. Ketki. You can begin your presentation.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, I would like to thank AIOS for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Viral Shah, sir, and my co-panelist for this session. So today my topic is on professional indemnity. Next slide, Tushar. I have no financial disclosures to make in this presentation, but I would like to acknowledge the special guidance of Dr. Ravi Wankhedkar, who hails from my hometown, and he is treasurer of World Medical Association. So why the indemnity is needed? Previously, doctors were considered God, but now may God save the saviors. Currently, as we have already seen in the past lectures, doctors are commonly accused of malpractice and medical negligence. And these cases are come under Consumer Protection Act. So the amount of compensation for which people are suing is tremendously increased. To err is human, and we all know that doctors' expertise lies in protecting health of the patient. But human error cannot be totally eliminated. And doctors are really now at risk for litigations, and we need to protect our litigation, protect ourselves now. So what is the professional indemnity? It is basically an insurance plan which financially safeguards medical practitioners, both financially and legally also. It covers the legal cost and claims for compensation by the patients. It is basically a special contractual obligation of one party to compensate the loss incurred by the aggravated party. There is one important terminology in this professional indemnity known as vicarious liability. As we all know, hospitals can be directly liable for their own negligence, or they can be sued for malpractice for their employees. So vicarious liability means, in simple words, boss pays for his employees. So hospital is legally liable for any malpractice committed by doctors, nurses, or other healthcare professionals employed by them. That includes counselors also. So we advise that indemnity insurance policies should be taken for doctors and hospital with staff separately. This slide shows that what are the eligibility criteria for taking a professional indemnity. So doctors, medical practitioners, counselors, professional service providers, everybody can have a professional indemnity policy taken. Hospitals, nursing homes, diagnostic centers can also have separate indemnity policies for their employees. It covers the professional negligence claims. It also covers the claim for defamations or loss of data or loss of goods. But it does not cover the criminal cases. It also does not cover the cases where doctor is being accused by the fact that he was being under the influence of alcohol or drug while rendering his services. So what is the limit of amount? As we have already seen, these cases are included in Consumer Protection Act. So the amount for which doctors can be sued can be very high. It can go up to 20 lakhs also, or more than that. So we need to protect us financially and legally. So the sum insured by a particular policy company is known as limit of indemnity. And this limit is fixed per incidence and per policy period. Here I would like to mention about one IMA and SBI card, where SBI has given complimentary professional indemnity insurance to the doctors worth 20 lakhs. I have no financial disclosures in this, but this facility is available through Indian Medical Association and SBI Bank. What are the agencies which provide this professional indemnity? Indian Medical Legal Consulting Service or Indian Medical Association having National Professional Protection Scheme. So these two are the governing agencies where IMA is providing professional indemnity to the doctors. While general insurance companies like National Insurance, United India or Oriental Insurance, they also provide professional indemnity policies. One difference I would like to mention here is in first two schemes, which is provided by Indian Medical Association, they cover all the medical, legal and administrative complaints, while the policies provided by general companies, insurance companies, they only cater the consumer cases. So more in detail about IMA National Protection Scheme. This scheme is available to the life members of Indian Medical Association. It helps in the harassments or litigation cases arising in due course of doctor's professional life. What is the prerequisite for this case is once such incidents occurs in doctor's life, then he has to immediately inform the honorary secretary or state representative of particular scheme about that incidents. If one particular doctor has taken this professional indemnity from IMA, but he fails to report it to the honorary secretary or state representative, then he is not liable to get the benefits of the scheme. So what kind of incidents he can face? So notice from any advocate or from any legal forum or from the individual patient or its relatives. Any kind of notice from these legal forums, the doctor have to immediately inform the honorary secretary, and then he can guide about the legal aid which is available in the scheme, and he can guide the further process. All India Ophthalmological Society has tie-up with Indian Medical Association, and they have come up with the policies for ophthalmologists. It has got baseline non-refundable fees of 3,000 rupees. Suppose, but there are no claims occurring in any year, then this amount gets reduced by 100 rupees each year. This goes up to 6 years. So suppose if some person has taken a policy in 2020 and there are no claims, so he can get no claim bonus of 100 rupees, and next year he has to just pay 2,900 rupees. This goes up to 6 years. This policy works under only the jurisdiction of Republic of India. So what is the sum insured in this policy? Claims up to 10 lakh for single case and 20 lakhs per year will be available. So that means maximum 2 cases in a year is available. A doctor can avail the financial assistance up to 50 lakh more amount if he takes the professional indemnity by IMA, that is called as Enhanced Protection Scheme, and the fees for that is 10,000 rupees. In some cases, this medical legal aid or the policy makers, they tell doctor to file a counter petition or suit against the party concerned for damage or defamation. And if this compensation is ordered by honorable court, then 50% of the amount should be remitted to the scheme after deducting all the expenses. So doctor have to give that 50% amount to the scheme. This was about the IMA policy. Now something about the policy by general insurance company. As I have already mentioned, general insurance companies like Oriental or National Insurance Company, they cater only consumer claims. It includes the policy holder and the nominee name, that is their employee name or some nominee name they have named in the proposal. These policies can be taken for the individual doctor, hospitals, diagnostic centers separately. Its jurisdiction again covers all Indian courts. It includes the bodily injuries to the patient and negligence claims, both. So what is this bodily injuries? Here we mean to say that ophthalmologist, if any ophthalmologist is getting sued for the death of the on-table death of the patient, then this policy is covering that kind of claims. So there is one more terminology in the policy that is known as policy period. It starts from the 12 midnight following the date of the acceptance of the risk. So 12 midnight of the one's policy is accepted by a particular company, and it expires at the midnight of the scheduled date, that is usually 1 year. But this policy period is not same as the period of insurance. While period of insurance is the period commencing from retroactive date. So indemnity is applicable only if the act has been committed during the period of insurance and it is continued thereafter without break. So definitely no grace period is there, and policy should be mandatorily renewed before the due date. So I would like to give a take-home message through this is, don't panic even if litigations occur. Know your law well, seek the legal help, and ensure your hospital employees also, and regularly renew the policies in due time to avoid lapse. Because if there is lapse, doctor is not liable to get the benefits of the scheme. I thank you everyone, and for the panel again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ketki, for such in-depth presentation regarding professional insurance indemnity. I think the Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society has also started.
Yes, yes. The whatever you have said, I will add to it that Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society has given the insurance of 1 crore for 7,200 rupees, and now the Indian Medico Legal Consulting Services can give this to any doctor all over the India. And so if anybody wants to have like, all benefits which you have recommended or you have said, all the benefits will be given along with the criminal case charges also, to the extent of advocate fees and court charges, all will be covered within 7,200 rupees for 1 crore rupees. So this is the benefit which is given to all medicos in India. So should take the benefit of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That is a hugely popular scheme now, getting large subscription from Maharashtra and rest of India also. Sir, we have also got a keynote address from Professor Dr. Pradeep Ramulu. Since it is 3 o'clock in the night there, he has sent his recording. So, sir, shall we play it and then we can take some questions for panel if time permits? Deshpande, sir.
Yes. It is my pleasure to hear her, because I was in the Wilmer Eye Institute with Dr. Kinsey for fellowship.
Okay, sir. Okay. So I will request the audiovisual to please play Dr. Ramulu's presentation. Yeah.
Playing now, sir.
Yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Pradeep Ramulu. I am going to speak to you today on the topic of whether physical activity can protect against eye disease. And I regret that we can't be there together in person, but I'm hoping I have the chance to meet all of you again sometime in the future. These are my disclosures, including disclosures from the National Institute of Health, which funded these much of the work that I'm going to talk to you about today. We were interested in physical activity starting many years ago because physical activity is a cornerstone of health. People who are less active have a higher mortality rate, and they also have greater rates of multiple diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, and cancer. Not surprisingly, people who are more active are also happier, and they have a better quality of life as well. An idea that we had several years ago, which has now become quite commonplace, is that we ought to really measure physical activity objectively using devices such as accelerometers, which calculate how many steps you perform or how much time you spent at higher levels of physical activity, such as moderate or vigorous physical activity. Not surprisingly, these are correlated with how much activity you actually do, such as how much energy you expend. And it's much more related to objective measures or objective outcomes than a self-reported physical activity. Here's some of that work shown here. This is a study that actually looked at correlations between subjective and objective physical activity, which were poor. And what they also did is they looked at how both self-reported activity and objective activity was related to a number of biomarkers. And in every case, what you see is that there's a higher Wald F score, meaning a stronger association for objective activity than self-reported activity. And this extends to a number of outcomes, including blood pressure, weight, and skin fold thickness, cholesterol, sugar, and multiple inflammatory markers as well. So while self-reported physical activity is important, it probably does not actually measure how much people move, but rather whether they feel like they can move. What we did find, which was also really kind of a big spur for our work, was that physical activity was significantly less than people who had uncorrectable visual acuity loss. This was work that was done by my student at the time, Jeff Willis, who found that people who had visual impairment did roughly half as much physical activity as those who had normal vision or uncorrected refractive error. What was really striking is that when you compare this effect of physical activity to numerous other conditions, it was really quite large. So people who had COPD or arthritis reduced their physical activity by 8 to 15%. Those who had diabetes or stroke reduced it by about a quarter. People who had congestive heart failure reduced it by about a third. But people whose vision was bilaterally impaired reduced it by about half. So it was actually the strongest factor with regards to activity restriction. This was one of the findings that we had, specifically looking at the association with diabetic retinopathy, which started getting us thinking that perhaps this is actually a protective effect as opposed to a downstream consequence of disease. We found that more physically active diabetics were less likely to have diabetic retinopathy. And amongst females, even just a modest amount of extra daily activity, 10 minutes a day, substantially lowered the chance that they would have moderate or severe retinopathy. And these effects were independent of their A1C, their blood pressure, or the disease duration. We also noted in the same NHANES data set that there were protective effects of physical activity against visual field damage. Specifically, those with bilateral visual field loss did 30% less physical activity as compared to those with normal sight. More recently, people have done more work from the same data set and shows that activity is lower in glaucoma patients. And they found that the odds of glaucoma was 10% lower for every 10% or 10-minute increase in daily moderate activity. And there was also a lower odds of glaucoma with higher average daily activity intensity. These associations extended to self-reported physical activity as well. And people who self-reported themselves as more active were less likely to have glaucoma. In the meantime, we were doing some of our own studies at Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute, looking at the association between visual field loss severity and objectively measured physical activity in glaucoma. And we found that individuals who had more severe glaucoma took fewer steps per day. The question then became, was this association just chance, or was it actually due to a protection between physical activity against glaucoma? Indeed, this idea of exercising protecting against glaucoma is not at all new. This is a study that was done 40 years ago now, which actually compared two groups, those with low tension glaucoma, in other words, individuals who got the disease despite not having a very strong risk factor of intraocular pressure, and ocular hypertensives, people who didn't get the disease despite having this very strong risk factor. And in fact, the primary thing, or one of the primary things that was actually different between these two groups was their self-reported activity. That in the ocular hypertensives, many more reported exercising, and in the low tension glaucoma group, most people reported themselves as being sedentary. When we looked at our data, in our associative data, which found that visual field loss was associated with less physical activity, what was interesting is that this didn't actually seem to be a downstream consequence. And you can look at this by a mediation result. So what we found is that individuals who, we found this association between visual field loss and less physical activity. But when you see if this association goes away when you add in something such as fear of falling, it didn't go away, nor did it go away if you added in something such as driving cessation. In other words, this seemed to be independent of the other mobility problems that they were having. This led us to think that this may be actually a causative effect, in the sense that physical activity was actually causing the disease to some extent. This effect was specific to glaucoma, and in age-related macular degeneration, less physical activity did seem to be the results of mobility problems. So specifically, a worse contrast sensitivity in AMD was associated with less physical activity, but this went away when you accounted for fear of falling. There's quite a bit of longitudinal data which actually suggests that that better fitness and more physical activity is protective against glaucoma and also other diseases such as cataract, though I won't show that here today. So this is a study that was done in male runners, and they caught them at a baseline age of 45 and followed them for 8 years. And what they found is that people who ran faster had less incident glaucoma, And there were no cases in men who could run very fast. So in other words, who ran a 10K at greater than 5 meters per second or 33 minutes for a 10K in the last 5 years. There was also a 50% decrease in incidence in men who ran more than 6 kilometers a day. They also did the study in women, but they couldn't analyze the results as too few women actually got glaucoma. So a very low incidence over 8 years, suggesting that this effect may even be more pronounced in women. There was also less incident diagnosed glaucoma in more active and more fit adults. In another study done by Meyer and colleagues, glaucoma was diagnosed by self-report, as was physical activity, and fitness was objectively measured. And they found that people who were more fit were less likely to get glaucoma, as were those who did more physical activity. What's more intriguing is that in mice, exercise has been shown to protect against age-related IOP damage to the electroretinogram. This is Jonathan Krauston's work, which showed that if you take older mice and you raise their pressure, their ERG amplitude goes down, but if you exercise those mice, you protect against it. Well, there's lots of factors that have been suggested to be protective against glaucoma through epidemiological studies, but what you really want to do to make sure you believe this is to see if there's a mechanism accounting for this association. And in exercise, there's a number of effects which have been shown that are beneficial physiologically. And so I think there's a lot of mechanism that's possible here. Specifically in mice, there's a protective effect of exercise through brain-derived neurotrophic factor and its receptor TrkB. So if you introduce a TrkB antagonist when you exercise animals, you block this ERG recovery or protection of exercise. Likewise, if you exercise mice that are haploinsufficient for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, you don't get the protection that you see as compared to a wild-type mouse. There's also human evidence that BDNF is released with exercise and that it is less available in patients with glaucoma. This shows that 4 hours after exercise, you can see plasma BDNF spike. And also in patients who have worse pattern standard deviation, their BDNF levels in the serum are lower. People have even shown that there's an alternate mechanism for exercise to be protective in that a 12-week aerobic conditioning program reduced IOP in sedentary ocular hypertensives, and after they stopped exercising, their intraocular pressure went right back into the 20s. More recently, people have shown better blood flow and tissue perfusion after 8 weeks of circuit training in older adults. So you can see that this HSCT or circuit training group did much better in tissue perfusion, RTP, and also in retinal blood flow as compared to a control group. There may be benefits of physical activity on treated glaucoma patients. In a study that we did, we looked at rates of change 5 years before and after a 1-week activity assessment, and we found that more active patients had slower progression, although the effect was mild. But they were independent of age, race, disease severity, and IOP. So do I tell my patients to exercise? Absolutely. There's strong suggestive benefits for a positive benefit. And while definitive evidence is lacking, advocating for exercise is good medicine. This is a recent review, which actually kind of goes over some of the extensive positive benefits of physical activity, and also talks about how there's a substantial amount of population adjustable risk, which can actually be used to prevent a number of different conditions by exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Though we would have loved to have him in person, but because of his time constraints and late night at 3 o'clock, almost 3 o'clock in the night there in US, he had requested to.
As if he was here, means because of virtual platform, we never thought he's not there. As if he was speaking.
So we have got 5-6 minutes left for panel discussion. So Marathi sir, I would like to start the ball rolling. Any comments from your side regarding the recent status of Consumer Protection Act 2019? Has cases started been registered using that CPA 2019, or we are yet to see some cases registered under 2019?
No. The new law has been started. Implemented.
New laws, but as sir, Deshpande sir, we have come across some cases filed under the new law.
Yeah, now the recent cases are being filed under the 19, but previous cases which were already lodged, they are conducted under the old law.
They will not be shifted to the new
They will not be shifted to the 19 because at that time the law was not there.
Even for appeal to the higher court, there will be
appeal up till now it has not been decided, but the same thing will happen with the appeals also. Because the old cases, when registered or when they are lodged, the law which was prevailing is the law for that case.
So it won't be applicable retrospectively. It will
Yeah,
No.
retrospectively, it an effect is not being given.
It cannot
The
be
thing
done.
is that the old law is totally peeled off.
Okay.
So whenever the peeled off means totally lost. So there cannot be retrospective effect of the new one.
So,
It started as a new one. That's all.
so some cases which happened in 2018, they will be lodged according to the old law or in the new law.
Old law, old law.
Okay. Regarding sir indemnity insurance, there was one question on the panel whether if suppose the doctor expires, whether his family or spouse should continue the indemnity insurance to protect them the patient from suing the estate.
No, they have to take the separate indemnity insurance because the insurance is done with the person. And if the person is lost, indemnity insurance is gone with him. But if it is of the hospital, it will be continued.
Okay.
And I think when the doctor is no more, all the cases with him are also gone.
The thing is that it is really the fact. But if it is included in a hospital, is included, case will
Yeah.
go on.
In case of hospital, it will be on.
Yeah.
Yeah, civil liability won't be write off. Only criminal liability will be written off.
Yeah, no. Criminal liability is totally gone. Whenever there is of the person, but civil liability can be continued in civil cases, not in consumer.
Compensation claims can be lodged.
But that should go into the civil law. That is civil case. Civil case is different from the consumer case because courts are different.
Sir,
Yeah, Joshi sir.
yeah, is it necessary to take insurance of work? If suppose a person working with you and staff, is it necessary to take the insurance of staff as well as suppose if consultant visits you?
Fortunately, this insurance which we are giving is covering the staff also and refractive surgeries also, which are generally not covered under the refractive indemnity insurance. But all the staff of the person is included, though hospital is not included. So hospital and staff is a different thing. If anything happens because of the hospital, suppose burn happens because of the short circuit, if something happens because of the hospital, that is a different thing. But if anything happens because of the mistakes or the anything act of a subordinate, that is covered under this 7,200.
Medical
I think it is vicarious liability. So whatever your
Vicarious
staff
of the
is doing,
staff,
so whatever your staff
not
is
of the
doing,
hospital.
you are responsible for that.
Yeah.
So better to take cover of the hospital staff also.
Yeah.
What about visiting consultants, sir? Those who visit once a month or once a week to your hospital.
So the whosoever comes to your hospital, that is hospital is the responsible.
So we don't
Hospital
have
should
to
take the insurance.
But again, that visiting doctor cannot escape. Again, vicarious liability.
Only vicarious liability is only there if he collects the fees himself. If the fees is collected by the concerned hospital and given to the person, doctor, then he is in no way in picture because of the Supreme Court decision.
Deshpande sir, may I ask one question?
Yeah.
Suppose the staff of the hospital is also responsible, means the doctor is responsible for the mischief done by the staff. The same way, suppose the surgeon or physician who is visiting that hospital again has to be covered by the hospital authority, chief of the hospital. That's what you mean.
The hospital can sue to the doctor.
Okay, indirectly.
Yeah, in that condition, because hospital is a consumer and doctor is service provider. That is the thing. And for staff, it is a vicarious liability. But consulting doctor or visiting doctor or a doctor working in a corporate hospital, trust hospital, or such hospitals is not the employee of that hospital, but he is either the working on the share, or if he is the employee, that is totally the responsibility of the hospital.
But sir, unfortunately, he also faces that music. Unfortunately.
That is true. But
Is
that
not
can
left
be
out.
saved with because so many advocates are not knowing this Supreme Court decisions and National Forum decision, and they are not taking the benefit of that because of so many reasons known to them.
Sir, even the government employees, doctors working in government setup, they also need to take this indemnity insurance.
Yes, yes, definitely.
Again,
Because
there, sir,
government
is
hospitals are
responsible or
not
they are
immune.
responsible?
Not immune.
Yeah, but it has been said that if you don't charge the patient, you are not supposed to have any charges.
It is true, but if your services are chargeable, that is, the government hospital is charging to other patients according to their income, and they are doing free services to some people. The consumer activity is there. In Maharashtra specifically, the mother and child and eye activities are under the national programs, and so those are exempted from this.
So I think our time is up, sir. We have got less than 2 seconds left. I would like to thank all my co-panelists, Dr. Anand Deshpande, sir, Dr. Prakash Marathe, sir, Dr. Rajesh Joshi, sir, Dr. Aarti Heda, Dr. Ketki Shah Bhatt from Dhulya. And I think Dr. Ajit Babu Maji and his team is there for the next session. So we should hand over it to it. So we are signing off this. I am Dr. Viral Shah from Nagpur.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
Welcome,
sir.
Dr. Ajit Babu. Welcome, sir. We are
Welcome,
vacating the
Ajit.
hall. We
Ajit
are vacating
Babu.
the hall in time. In time.
Yesterday also we had together, but we could not speak.
Okay.
It's
meeting all
nice
of
to
you.
see all of you.
The
Yes,
panel
sir.
have been organizing
In the
something.
pandemic, yeah.
We still have 5 minutes to go. 4
Okay.
minutes to go now for
Yeah.
the next session to begin.
Sir, we are still live or we are off the air now? We are still live or we are off the air?
We are still live, no?
Live.
No,
Look,
sir, we are
Yes,
still live.
you are all still live.
We stay live until all the sessions end for the day.
No. That is a transition period we are talking about. One session has
Oh,
been
yes,
ended
sir,
and
we
another
should
has to
conclude,
start.
yeah.
Don't put it off, sir. It just keeps going.
Okay.
Recording is still on. We can
Yeah.
I think we should conclude our session now and we can
Yeah.
take some questions if they are.
Virtually, you
I
can
think-
give the trophies to
I
all
think,
speakers.
yeah.
Virtually, you give trophies to all
I think
speakers.
I must congratulate Dr. Viral Shah for conducting such a wonderful instruction course. I think he has been doing this for over the years at national level as well as state level. And also I must congratulate and thank my mentor, Dr. A. Deshpande, who has been doing medical legal symposium at all conferences, at all platforms, and he's giving opportunity to most of us, even the juniors. And I think this subject, which is untouched by most of us, and that is kept as option, must be learned by all the ophthalmologists, because they also should know about the legality, what they have been doing in their practice.
It should be included in medical career in education.
Yeah, that's
That
what the
was
headline,
Titles.
tagline, what they never taught us in medical colleges.
Yeah, that should be taught, really.
Deshpande, you have done enough of the sessions on
Oh,
medical
yes,
legal
sir.
aspects.
Yes, sir.
Now
Last
you
time
need
also.
to tell the government of India.
Thank you. Thank you. I could not speak yesterday. We were there, but just keep mum and we could not talk each other. That was my bad luck.
No.
Now
We are
I
there
have
for
an
each other
opportunity to
whole
speak
life.
with you. How are you? Nice.
I'm good.
Good. Very good.
Dr. Aarti, Dr. Keti, you want to put in some words before we sign off? Yeah, Dr. Aarti.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and it was really a pleasure to be amongst all the stalwarts in medical legal services. Though I have done a diploma course in that, I mean, I have learned so much today from this. So thank you for the opportunity, and I hope we continue this journey.
Definitely. Yeah, Dr. Ketki.
yes, definitely. I would like to say the same. Being part with like Dr. Marathe sir, Dr. Deshpande sir, and all of you. Really, it was a wonderful experience, and I think we should be continuing again this.
I think Ketki, one word I would like to put here. I am an activist, and I know Dr. Ravi Vankirkar and most of the IMA people. And
Yeah.
even that relation of your topic with IMA and AIOS, very
Yeah.
nice to see that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Joshi sir. Yeah, Dr. Joshi sir.
Yeah, it's in fact wonderful course. Since inception, I am the part of this course, and I enjoy every time I attend this course, I get some new things. So I think Viral, you should continue doing this course at state as well as international level, and international level also.
I would like to add that it was a brainchild of Dr. Rajesh Joshi sir, but since he was already so busy with so many commitments, this course fell into my lap, and I happily took it over and submitted it to All India Conference and All India AIOC, and it got accepted each and every time. So I think the credit goes to Joshi sir, Deshpande sir, Marathe sir, and all the panelists we have over the years, and it is maturing day by day. So we'll keep increasing our level from basic to intermediate and intermediate to advanced courses as and when the iOS permits us. So thank you everyone. Thank you for
Thank you so much.
Yeah, over to Ekta, hall coordinator. Yeah.
Thank you so